Perhaps no Utahn has ever been more involved in a presidential inaugural than Stephen Studdert. The resume is impressive. He was a staff assistant under President Gerald Ford, special assistant to the president during the Reagan years, and assistant to the president during the George Bush 41 administration. Our conversation was wide-ranging and covered a number of topics, but we focused primarily on his role as executive director of the 1989 presidential inaugural of President George H.W. Bush. We'll roll it out in 5 parts each day leading up to the inauguration of Donald Trump. This is brought to you by 24/9, an external affairs consulting firm specializing in strategy, engagement, and influence. We hope you enjoy. Presidential inauguration coming up this week. You've had some extensive experience with these. So is it something you look back on fondly, or do you get sort of a PTSD with this and think back to all the things that it could have gone wrong or did go wrong or might have gone wrong? Which is it for you?
A little bit of both. I celebrate every time America has a presidential inauguration because we're the only country in the world who, with absolute precision clockwork, has an inauguration on a date specific at noon, January 20th, every 4 years. No other country has an absolute date certain. And that is a change of power. Maybe from one individual to another, maybe from one political party to another, but it's peaceful, it's civil, it's scheduled, it's glorious. And so from that perspective, I absolutely just thrill with the presidential inaugural. When I think about all of the moving pieces, then I have a little PTSD.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your involvement with various presidencies, because it didn't just start with President H.W. Bush, nor with President Reagan, but with Gerald Ford. Is that correct?
Yes, and now remember, Gerald Ford did not have an inaugural. Mm-hmm. He was vice president to President Nixon. President Nixon resigned in August of 1974, and Gerald Ford became president merely by taking the oath of office.
That was the easiest one to plan in the history.
Absolutely, it was a piece of cake. And you think about it, Lyndon Johnson, for example. In his first term, he became president, not by plan, but by succession with the death of President Kennedy. There's an interesting story associated with that, Marty, that they couldn't find the oath of office. And they were panicking, who's going to give this oath of office? And we have to get a Supreme Court justice, and we're in Texas. And how are we going to do this? And the Secret Service insisted that he take the oath of office before he leave Texas. The oath of office is in the Constitution. So there wasn't a hard thing to find. Mm-hmm. And anyone authorized to give an oath, including a notary public, town clerk, justice of the peace, can administer the oath of office to the President of the United States.
We saw a similar situation on the state level this time. We had a federal and state holiday on the 2nd when the Constitution of the state says they're supposed to be sworn in. The inaugural was actually on the 4th.
Right.
And the lieutenant governor was in San Pete County. And the justice from the state Supreme Court, who was supposed to get there to do it, couldn't because of weather. So they found a justice there, a judge in the county. So I guess from time to time you have to make that work.
That's right. But for scheduled inaugurals, generally the president-elect selects the person to administer the oath who is someone significant to them. And in most recent cases, it's been the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
What was your role in each of Reagan's inaugurals compared to your role with George Bush?
In each of Reagan's 2 inaugurals, I played a senior advisor role. Mm-hmm. In both cases, I was on his personal staff at the time, and so my duties are really more to him than to the inaugural. In the first one, I was on his staff as president-elect, second one as White House staff. Mm-hmm. In the George Bush Sr. inaugural, I was the director of the inaugural. And it's considered by presidents back into tradition to be bad luck to talk about an inaugural before Election Day. So nobody on the president's team does any real planning. And so all of a sudden now the individual's elected, and you've got somewhere between 60 and 70 days, depending upon the calendar, to execute the inaugural from start to finish. The Bush inaugural was comparatively easy in that he was the sitting vice president. There was no transition of power from one political party to another. It wasn't a case of, for example, in Reagan's first inaugural, he had defeated the sitting incumbent, Jimmy Carter. So there was some tension and some animosities between the two teams, in spite of what they say publicly about a smooth transition. Sometimes some of those who are soon to be unemployed at noon on January 20th, and that's an interesting thing, is that your White House pass expires at noon. At 12:05, it doesn't work. And so many of those people are going to unemployment. So even though presidents say we're going to have a smooth transition, a lot of people throw up obstructions when there's a transition from one party to another.
So if you can't plan this based on luck, or based on not jinxing the whole thing, you can't plan it until election night and until someone is called to concede. How quickly does it start? I mean, is it bad luck to at least have someone who's going to be in charge should you win? Is it bad luck to think
It's bad luck to even talk about it. Yeah. At least that's the tradition.
Yeah.
We were on the plane on Air Force Two, flying back from Texas to Washington, D.C. the morning after the election when George Bush was elected. And he invited me to come and sit with him, and he asked me to direct his inaugural. And that was, news to me. And I said, give me a minute, I want to phone my wife and see if we'll still be married.
Because it's a time commitment. Talk to me about what kind of hours you're putting in from the time you have that discussion with the president-elect until the time that the inaugural is in the bag, that it's over.
It really is unlike any other position in the world. Noon, January 20th is an absolute date. There cannot be an extension of it. It can't be postponed. You can't say, give us another week. Things have to happen, according to the Constitution, at noon on the 20th. And so you have to work toward that. In my experience with the inaugurals I've worked, generally you work 12 to 15 hours every day, maybe only 10 hours on Sunday. In the inaugural that I directed, we had a half a day off on Thanksgiving, and we had all day off on Christmas. And otherwise, we worked every other day.
What kind of hours in those days?
For me, probably 18, 19, 20 hours every day. We had a senior staff meeting every morning at 7, except during inaugural week, it was at 5 in the morning. We tried to conclude our nighttime activities by 2 or 3 a.m. So it's a consuming task. When I headed it, I started off as employee number 1. By the time Inauguration Day came, 66 days later, I had 30,000 volunteers and 800 paid employees.
There's one thing that you have to accomplish at the inaugural. You have to have the president at the podium with the Chief Justice and the Bible and actually take the oath of office.
And interestingly enough, power actually transitions even if the oath hasn't been administered yet. At 12 o'clock, the outgoing president is out.
Yeah.
And it might be
his pass turns off as well.
It's gone, and the nuclear codes, which the military aid, for example, carries, shift to the new president, even if he hasn't yet taken the oath of office.
But if that's the one thing you have to do, for all intents and purposes, everything leads up to the swearing in.
That's correct.
And everything else, to some extent, would be considered pomp and circumstance.
All of it's pomp and circumstance, none of it's necessary except for the message it sends to the world.
Yeah, so that's my question, is what are you really trying to accomplish with an inaugural?
You want to do 3 or 4 things. First of all, you want the president to take the oath of office, which is the fundamental constitutional obligation of an inauguration. Second of all, you want to use the inauguration to communicate the president's thoughts, directions, vision, and values to America and to our foreign policy partners around the world and to our adversaries around the world. This is an opportunity to say to the world, this is what his presidency is going to look like. And then the third thing really is you want it to be a chance for Americans to celebrate America. It's really not about the individual. It's about our democracy and celebrating our republic.
What did you really nail? What did you just get right on any of the
Every single piece of it.
So a better follow-up question. Excluding those 3, what have you seen done where from your unique vantage point you said, boy, they really nailed that. That was a great idea.
I'll give you a couple of examples, Marty. George Bush Sr. had said he wanted to be the education president. And so one of the things that was done, for example, in his inaugural was to invite 5 school teachers from each state. And there was a process designed where those teachers, one was selected by the governor, one was selected by the dominant teachers association or union in the state, etc. And we didn't want them to be somebody from the district office. We didn't want them to be the superintendent. We wanted them to be classroom teachers, whether they were public, private, or parochial. And the wonderful things we saw come from that, I remember, for example, in Hawaii, one of the teachers selected was a classroom teacher from a poor little community in an outer area of one of the islands. And the whole community came together and did fundraisers to buy her an inaugural gown. Those are the great things about it, is that hundreds of thousands of people all across the country that get involved. And that turned out to be a wonderful thing, as these 5 teachers from each of our 55 states and territories came together in Washington, D.C. It said a lot about America. Some of the other things that I've seen really done well is when the political hatchet is buried and they come together in a real sense of unity for the moment. And I've seen that done a number of times. Ronald Reagan, if you remember, on his first inauguration, that was the day that 52 American diplomats who had been held 444 days in Iran by terrorists were being released by Iran. And Reagan had planned, and there was a signal. We were to signal him if the hostages cleared American airspace during his inaugural address. And he was going to stop his address and turn and invite President Carter to come to the microphone and make remarks, because he viewed the release of those hostages as a celebration for President Carter. It's some of those kinds of little moments that really say this is a great country, and it's far bigger than partisan politics.
What was the sign? I was just scratching.
That was it.
Wow.
I was standing. I was standing stage right, and another guy was standing stage left. And if he'd look our way and we did this, that was the signal.
Yeah, could have come up with something safer. I mean, if your nose itched, you'd have been in trouble.
I couldn't have itched it.
Yeah, had to use your shoulder or something like that. This conversation with Stephen Studdert has also been brought to you by the Salt Lake Chamber. The Chamber's hosting the Utah Economic Review January 18th at 7:30 in the morning. You can find more information and register on their website at slchamber.com. Coming up on our next episode.